Last time in our Wednesday Spotlight, we began to look at Nehemiah, the book of Nehemiah, to see the example of Nehemiah and that of what went on there with the people through and by Nehemiah's leadership, and with, of course, the help and blessing of God. And last time we looked at the beginning of Nehemiah, and what happened was we talked about the heart of Nehemiah, how Nehemiah had a heart for God, a care and a concern for God, for God's people, for God's glory and worship and praise to God. So when Nehemiah in chapter 1, found out about how things were not very good like they should be back home in Jerusalem after, the first wave went back or the waves there to rebuild the temple and all of that, but then the walls were still destroyed and they were still oppressed and different things. It really affected Nehemiah. So Nehemiah had a heart for God, and that desire led him to pray to God, to request of the king for Nehemiah to go back home, to rebuild the walls, to get this done, to help his people. And so we left off in verse 11 when Nehemiah comes to Jerusalem. By the grace of God, God, through the king, allows Nehemiah to go back to Jerusalem. So Nehemiah shows up. He's there for 3 days. And today, let's look at what happened next. It's something else we need to see about having a heart for God. If we're going to live for God, serve God, be His people, be His church, do the work of the kingdom. And I want to look at this next point with you, starting in verse 12, that Nehemiah says, I arose in the night, I and just a few men with me. I told no one what my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem, nor was there any animal with me except the one on which I rode. So Nehemiah is being careful. Not that he's afraid per se, but he wants to, as we see here, to kind of get an assessment of everything and kind of see the situation for himself. And then he's going to go from there. So verse 13, he says, I went out by night through the valley gate to the serpent well and the refuse gate, and viewed the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and its gates, which were burned with fire. Then I went on to the fountain gate and to the king's pool, but there was no room for the animal under me to pass. So I went up in the night by the valley and viewed the wall. Then I turned back and entered by the valley gate, and so returned. And then he says, verse 16, that the officials did not know where I had gone or what I had done. I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or the others who did the work. So Nehemiah had not yet told anybody the plans of getting this wall rebuilt. So Nehemiah goes out. He sees the damage for himself. He sees how bad things are. He sees what needs to be done, all of the different things, getting these assessments. Well, then when he comes back, after figuring all this out, he comes back then to lead the people, motivate them, inspire them, say, come on, we've got work to do. Let's look at what happened. Verse 17, then I said to them, you see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lies waste and its gates are burned with fire. Come and let us build the wall of Jerusalem, that we may no longer be a reproach. So what what Nehemiah does, he says, folks, you need to look, open your eyes, see the situation we're in. See what has happened, see what has not happened, see how we're being looked at and seen, but still in a shameful way, a reproach. Nehemiah says, come on, we have got to do something about this. We have got to build the wall of Jerusalem. We've got to build it again. We've got to get this job done. Come on, we can't sit around any longer. We've got to get this rebuilt. And so then Nehemiah went on to tell them of the hand of God, which had been good upon him. As he says, I told them of the hand of my God, which had been good upon me, and also of the king's words that he had spoken to me. So Nehemiah tells them, listen, I've prayed to God. God has heard. God has blessed us. God has given us favor in the eyes of the king. The king has said for this to be done. He's given us what we need to get it done. And thankfully, look how the people respond, which is so important. So they said to Nehemiah, let us rise up and build. They said, okay, let's go. Then they set their hands or strengthened their hands to do this work. Nehemiah comes in to lead the people to get to work and get things done. Thankfully, Nehemiah is able to reach the people's heart. He gets them to see the situation they're in and what they need to get done. And thankfully, the people are inspired and encouraged. They're motivated. They say, let's go. Let's rise up and build. And they set their hands to do this good work. That's what's needed, the motivation, the inspiration, the drive, the purpose, everything about realizing their situation, and then say, hey, let's go. Let's get this done. There's work to do, good work to do. Let's go get this done. Well, just about in anything that goes on, not everybody's going to be in favor, and not everybody is going to be encouraging. Sometimes there is going to be opposition. Sometimes there are going to be enemies. There are going to be challenges, and that's what we see happen here. We already heard back in chapter 1 when Nehemiah first was coming, that in verse 10, actually of chapter 2, I'm sorry, Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 10, that when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard of it, they were deeply disturbed. The man had come to seek the well-being of the children of Israel. Well, here in verse 19, when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem heard of it, they laughed at us and despised us, Nehemiah says. They laughed at us, they despised us, they said, what is this thing that you are doing? Will you rebel against the king? And so they're mocking them, they're taunting them, they're trying to discourage Nehemiah and God's people. But notice Nehemiah's response. I answered them and I said to them, the God of heaven himself will prosper us. Therefore we his servants will arise and build, but you have no heritage or right or memorial in Jerusalem. Nehemiah was strong. Nehemiah didn't back down regardless of the opposition or the laughing and the mockery and the taunting. Nehemiah said, you can say and do whatever you will, but we're going to serve God. God is with us. God's going to bless us in this work. We're going to work and get it done. You have no part in this, but we're going to get it done. So Nehemiah was strong in faith and trust in God. I mean, right from the get-go, there's opposition, tension, possible fear, possible danger throughout this whole thing, as we'll see. But Nehemiah chose to lead the people by faith in God. What I get from this, and something as we continue, we know we got to have a heart for God. We got to have that concern, which starts with, where does the motivation, where does the inspiration come from? It comes from, as Nehemiah started, we've got to open our eyes to see the situation, to see what this life is all about, to see souls that are still lost in the world that need to hear the gospel and come to know Jesus and to be saved. And we need to see our brothers and sisters in Christ who need our help and our encouragement and our love. We've got to see the work that needs to be done, the good work. And then we've got to say, let's go together to one another. Say, let's get up, let's rise, let's get up and build. Let's work, let's get this done. And then strengthen and set our hands to do the good work. Later, we're going to see that it's going to be said that they got it done because they set their mind to work. That's what we've got to do. We've got to set our hands. We've got to strengthen our hands to do the work. And then There are going to be times we're going to face opposition, unfortunately, sometimes even within the brotherhood, within the church. Sometimes we're going to receive opposition, enemies, people who are not going to, like or want to be a part of what we're trying to do for the Lord. But we cannot let any of it discourage us, whether it comes from those in the church or those outside the church. Whatever opposition, whatever pressure, whatever tension, we've got to say that we're here to do the work of God no matter what. We trust God, we have faith in God, and we're not going to let anything stop us or get in our way. Let's rise up and build. That's my encouragement to you and really for myself. Let's open our eyes. Let's see. Look at the work of God that He is calling us to do in all sorts of ways. And let's rise up and build. Let's get to work. And let's get it done. Trusting God in faith and doing all to His glory. God bless.